Hello and a very good morning. You're watching Rajya Sabha television. This is the breakfast news. I'm Frank Pereira. Here are the latest headlines. India-Pakistan war rhetoric escalates over continued face-off on the border. Defence Minister Arun Jaitley promises a befitting response. UN calls for diplomatic resolution. With less than 4 days to go for polling in Haryana and Maharashtra, political parties unleash big guns for campaigning. Odisha and Andhra Pradesh brace for cyclone Hudhud. Storm gathers strength after causing havoc in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Ebola outbreak and signs of its spread, the biggest challenge since HIV/AIDS, says a top US medical official. And the Hong Kong government has called off today's talks with pro-democracy student activists, says constructive dialogue not possible as protests continue. Our top focus on the bulletin this morning. Charges and counter-charges rage between India and Pakistan on continued shelling on the line of control and international border. Defence Minister Arun Jaitley has warned Pakistan it will pay an unaffordable price for continuing ceasefire violations. The Prime Minister has congratulated Indian soldiers on action taken, with every chance of more violence to come. Here's a detailed report.
On a day when 5 more civilians were injured in the cross-border firing between India and Pakistan, Defence Minister Arun Jaitley warned Pakistan it will pay an unaffordable price for the violence.
Pakistan in these attacks has clearly been the aggressor, but it must realize that our deterrence will be credible. If Pakistan persists with this adventurism, our forces will make the cost of this adventurism unaffordable.
Jaitley's Pakistani counterpart responded with equally stern words, even reminding India that the conflict between two nuclear powers shouldn't be allowed to go out of hand. Jaitley's remarks of a strong response came a day after Prime Minister Narendra Modi said an end could be in sight for the violence. 9 Pakistani and 8 Indians have been killed so far in over a week of fighting. Jaitley said the cross-border fighting was an attempt to infiltrate militants.
There is a connection between firing and infiltration. It was also an effort by Pakistan to precipitate tension where none existed.
Opposition leaders say India's response needs to be not only an effective deterrent, but also an attempt at finding a lasting solution to the problem.
Telling Pakistan in no uncertain terms, without any ambiguity, but with firmness, that Indian response to this provocation will be firm, will be adequate, and will be an effective deterrent.
It is necessary that the Indian government and the Pakistani government talk and see that the ceasefire is maintained and the violations stop. For that, whatever is necessary should be done.
Nearly 20,000 people are reported to have fled their homes in Jammu and are taking refuge in schools and relief camps. On Thursday, Akhnoor residents took stock of the damage.
सर ये रात को यहाँ से पाकिस्तान की तरफ से हैवी शेलिंग हो रही थी और इधर से फायर आया जो इधर लगा है, तो ये काफी ज्यादा नुकसान हुआ गांव को, कुछ उधर भी गिरे हैं, पशुओं को भी लगी है और 2-3 बंदे भी घायल हुए हैं.
We are trying to minimize the casualties and we are doing that by evacuating areas along the international border with, I believe, a fair degree of success.
Indian forces retaliated with gunfire and mortar shells on about 50 border security posts overnight. While sporadic gunfire is nothing new in the area, the widespread fighting and the number of civilian deaths has unnerved local residents.
बार बार हमें अपना घर छोड़ के बाहर जाना पड़ता है, स्कूल कॉलेजेस में कैंप है तो वहाँ पे स्कूल भी हम अटेंड नहीं कर पाते हैं, इसलिए पढ़ाई का बहुत ज़्यादा नुकसान हो रहा है यहाँ पे।
In New Delhi, protests were held outside the Pakistani High Commission. The cross-border skirmishes are the most intense in over a decade, having increased exponentially in the last couple of months. They also mark Modi's first defence crisis since becoming Prime Minister in May. The violence also coincides with the end to the weeks of anti-government protest in Pakistan, as well as the assembly elections in Maharashtra and Haryana. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Meanwhile, the United Nations has expressed concern on the escalating tensions between India and Pakistan. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called for dialogue and a speedy diplomatic solution. US senators had asked the UN to play a helpful and an active role in resolving the crisis. The UN released a statement saying, and I quote, "The Secretary General concerned about the recent escalation of violence along the line of control between India and Pakistan. Ban encourages the governments of India and Pakistan to resolve all differences through dialogue," unquote. Well, let's now bring you up to date with all the news from the election-bound states of Haryana and Maharashtra. Well, it's just 4 days of campaigning left for the assembly polls in Maharashtra and Haryana. All the party stalwarts are out there challenging the might of their opponents. Congress Vice President Rahul Gandhi addressed 3 rallies in Haryana on Thursday. Continuing from where he left off in Maharashtra, Rahul Gandhi hit out at Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the BJP-led government at the centre. In Maharashtra, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Congress President Sonia Gandhi, BJP President Amit Shah, BSP Supremo Mayawati and several other top leaders addressed several rallies in different parts of the state, seeking votes for their parties and taking jibes at each other. While Maharashtra will witness election for 288 seats, 90 seats will be up for grabs in Haryana in the election to be held on the 15th of October. The results will be announced on the 19th of October.
हमारे लोग मारे जा रहे हैं, 6 दिन के लिए एक शब्द नहीं निकला और फिर कहते हैं भैया जल्दी ठीक हो जाएगा। नया नारा बनना चाहिए, हरियाणा के लिए नया नारा बनना चाहिए, जय जवान, जय किसान, जय पहलवान।
देश को तो आजादी मिली, लेकिन बारामती के नागरिक, बारामती के किसान दूसरी गुलामी में फंस गए हैं। ऐसे लोगों ने यहां कब्जा कर लिया, ऐसे लोगों ने कब्जा कर लिया, न आपका खेत सलामत है, न आपकी जमीन सलामत है, न आपके सपने सलामत है। यहां का किसान अपने हकों की लड़ाई लड़ रहा है और मैं आपको विश्वास दिलाता हूं भाइयों, आने वाले दिन सच्चे अर्थ में आपके लिए आजादी का अवसर लेकर के आएंगे 15 अक्टूबर को।
In more election news now, INLD leader Om Prakash Chautala will have to take a break from his busy campaigning schedule today. Chautala is to appear before the Delhi High Court after the CBI complained that he was violating bail conditions by actively campaigning for the last 2 weeks. The court had last month cancelled his bail on medical grounds and directed him to surrender by the 17th of October. But the CBI requested the court to ask him to surrender immediately. Sources say Chautala, a special CBI court, has also summoned him in a disproportionate assets case. The CBI had filed a charge sheet against him in March for allegedly possessing assets worth 6 crore rupees disproportionate to known sources of his income. And for all the election-related buzz and stories from the campaign trail, watch our special election bulletin Verdict 2014 every day at 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Moving on now, Andhra Pradesh and Odisha are bracing for cyclone Hudhud that is expected to strike the mainland late tomorrow. On Thursday, the storm struck in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, leaving a trail of destruction. Extensive preparations are underway in both states. Here's a report.
With the cyclonic storm Hudhud gathering force on Thursday, the Met Department issued warnings of heavy rainfall along the coasts of Andhra Pradesh and South Odisha. Hudhud has moved into a west-northwestward direction from the east-central Bay of Bengal. It will cross the North Andhra Pradesh coast near Visakhapatnam by Sunday afternoon.
Cyclonic storm over Bay of Bengal has moved west-northwest directions, and it was lying about 780 kilometers southeast of Gopalpur.
Disaster management preparations have been stepped up in the cyclone-prone districts of both states. Odisha Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik has sought help from the Air Force if the need arises.
Today I've reviewed the contingency plans of important departments like water resources, energy, food and civil supplies and works.
हमारी टीमें तैयार पोजीशन में है, रेडी टू डिप्लॉय। 12 टीमें एनडीआरएफ मुंडली की हैं। जरूरत पड़ने पर और बटालियन से टीमें आ सकती हैं।
Panic-struck villagers in the coastal regions, meanwhile, are scrambling to pile up food and essential items.
डर लगता है। क्या डर लगता है? ज़्यादा समुद्र बढ़ के चला आएंगे, डर लगता है। क्या करेंगे? क्या करेंगे? ऐसे ही रहेंगे। सरकार कुछ बताता ही नहीं।
Cabinet Secretary Ajit Seth also reviewed the preparedness to meet any eventuality from the cyclone in the two states. The centre has also issued guidelines to the state administrations. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Moving on now, a new AIMS post-mortem report on Sunanda Pushkar, wife of former Union Minister Shashi Tharoor, says that she died of poisoning. AIMS submitted its final post-mortem examination report to Delhi Police on September 30th, reiterating its finding in the preliminary report that the cause of death was poisoning. The report may force Delhi Police to register an FIR in the case. So far, the case has been investigated through inquest proceedings, that is, a case of unnatural death. Sunanda was found dead in a 5-star hotel room on January 17th in the national capital this year. Meanwhile, jailed AIADMK chief J. Jayalalitha has moved Supreme Court challenging the October 7th Karnataka High Court order in the disproportionate assets case. Jayalalitha's lawyers said that the petition sought relief from imprisonment on the ground that she is a 66-year-old woman suffering from several ailments. It also cited that she had been sentenced to a term of simple and not rigorous imprisonment. In such cases, grant of bail is the norm. It also argued that bail could only be denied in exceptional circumstances. The AIADMK chief has been sentenced to 4 years of imprisonment and ordered to pay a fine of 100 crore rupees for offences under the Prevention of Corruption Act. We'll slip into a short break now, but ahead on the show, fresh hope after US coalition airstrikes stall IS advance in Kobani. That and other world news on the other side of this short break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha television. Well, Europe and the US have ramped up anti-Ebola screening measures as a top US medical official declared that the Ebola challenge is the biggest since AIDS. US Secretary of State John Kerry said that the US is confident it can contain Ebola within its shores. A group of 90 US Marines and airmen arrived in Liberia, one of the worst-hit countries, on Thursday. Meanwhile, the Liberian president postponed a senatorial election in his country, citing the Ebola outbreak in the country.
This is a fluid and heterogeneous epidemic. It's changing quickly, and it's going to be a long fight. I will say that in the 30 years I've been working in public health, the only thing like this has been AIDS. And we have to work now so that this is not the world's next AIDS.
Things will get worse before they get better. How much worse depends on us, the international community. So to all who have pledged, I say today, please deliver now.
The spread of Ebola epidemic beyond African nations has now become a cause of concern. The World Bank chief, Jim Kim, said that the international community has failed miserably to tackle the crisis effectively. He has sought another $20 billion fund at a time when the disease has fueled fear of Western pandemic.
Every day that we don't put money into stopping the crisis is many, many more dollars and pounds that we're going to have to use later. It is an extremely good investment right now to prevent this kind of loss, to put all the money on the table right now to get the response going.
Spain has quarantined 3 more people suspected of carrying the virus. This includes a doctor who was treating a Spanish nurse, the first person to contact the deadly virus outside of Africa. The health official said the nurse infected herself by touching her face with contaminated gloves.
Como si Teresa es cierto que ha tenido ese pequeño accidente que se ha rozado la cara y se ha podido contaminar, como si se ha aplicado el protocolo estrictamente y el protocolo exige estrictamente que haya unos observadores tanto a la puesta del equipo.
Altogether, about 80 people are being monitored in Spain to see if they develop symptoms of Ebola. United States has also stepped up precautionary measures to prevent the disease from spreading further. The country recorded its first death to the deadly virus in Texas. A second person quarantined in Dallas is said to be a low-risk patient. Authorities have launched stringent screenings at US airports, but it's said it doesn't guarantee zero risk of Ebola spreading further.
What we're doing is putting in additional protection. We've been very clear that as long as Ebola continues to spread in Africa, we can't make the risk zero here. We wish we could.
The World Bank has warned that the disease could get worse in US and Spain in the coming days. Ebola has already claimed close to 4,000 lives in West African nations. The World Health Organization said further sporadic cases of Ebola in Europe were now inevitable. Bureau Report, Rajya TV.
Joining me on the show this morning is Professor Lalit Dar, Department of Microbiology at AIIMS. Good morning, Lalit, and thank you for joining us on the show this morning. Let's talk about this Ebola epidemic now and see if we are prepared for it or not. First and foremost, but do you think enough has been done as far as trying to contain this deadly disease is concerned?
I think already a lot of work has been put in place for this particular disease. And, we need to understand that this is transmitted by very close contact. So only those people who have close contact with patients or with, at the time of death, who encounter these patients, in a close proximity, or people who are handling them, the healthcare workers, would be at risk. Now, as of now, India has no indigenous cases.
Yes.
So whatever will come from outside.
Yes.
And for that, I think airport surveillance is already there in place.
So you're saying we are well prepared then, just in case there is a case such as this, then India is well prepared.
Yes, and we have already put in place in the major cities where you expect the airport surveillance to, produce some contacts or cases. The hospitals have wards which are equipped with the facilities that are required, personal protective equipment and so on, and the staff is, trained enough to handle that.
Of late, over the last 3 or 4 days, we've seen a flurry of activity as far as, trying to contain this deadly disease, because we've seen a couple of cases being reported outside of West Africa, one in the US and one in Spain. Do you think, now that the disease has left the shores of Africa, people are far more concerned about what's likely to happen?
The concern has obviously increased. It seemed inevitable that there will be some spillover into these other countries, because you have travelers going from Africa to these countries, and with the best of surveillance, you might still miss somebody who's still in the incubation period. So it becomes very important for those people who are coming back from Africa to make sure that if they start getting any symptoms like high fever and all that, they must report immediately to the health authorities. Now, this kind of advisory is given to them on their flights and at the time they land at the airport. But it is the duty of every citizen to get back on this. Now, what probably happens in some situations is that they do not get back, and then, you know, once they develop symptoms, at that time, they may infect other people, or more commonly, it's in hospital settings when they are being cared for.
And what are the symptoms to look out for? What are the telltale signs, really, as far as Ebola is concerned?
See, there is nothing very, very specific, but anybody, see, the first thing is that they have to have traveled to an area where it is already there. The second thing is they have to look out for high-grade fever, vomiting, diarrhea, muscle pains, body aches. So these symptoms are not that specific. But anybody who comes back from that area and develops any of these things must get back to the health authorities immediately.
One of the US officials has compared this or likened this to the AIDS, disease that was spreading several decades ago. Do you think it's right, or do you think it's still, in its nascent stage and it's not right to term it that way?
There is a rapid increase in Africa, there is no doubt. Normally in Africa, it's been there in Africa since '76, by the way. So they have been able to control it previously. This time round, it has spread in Africa much faster than has been seen in the past. So that part is okay. There is a major difference between HIV infection and Ebola, and that is that Ebola is transmitted only when you have obvious symptoms. A person who's in the incubation period does not transmit it. So if somebody is on a flight and is in the incubation period, they are not likely to transmit it to the passenger sitting next to them. But if they have fever, then so the major difference is that the person is symptomatic at the time, whereas in HIV, the person may be completely normal and asymptomatic when he is still able to transmit it.
Indeed, indeed. All right, Professor Dutt, thank you so much for joining us on the program this morning and putting things into perspective for us. Hope you people watching at home liked it, and now you're clear about what Ebola is and what it really does. Moving on now, of course, the Hong Kong government has called off talks with the pro-democracy student protesters that were scheduled for today. Hong Kong's Chief Secretary Carrie Lam said a constructive dialogue became impossible after protest leaders called for stepped-up efforts to occupy main protest areas. Student leaders hit back at the government for using petty excuses to derail the talks and called for more people to occupy the streets. The government's decision came as lawmakers demanded that anti-graft officers investigate a $6.4 million business payout to Hong Kong leader C.Y. Leung while he was in office.
With much regret, based on the public remarks made by the student representatives over these 2 days, especially this afternoon, I realize that the basis for a constructive dialogue between us and the students has been seriously undermined. I truly regret that we will not be able to have a meeting tomorrow which will produce any constructive outcome.
Carrie Lam's claim is simply an excuse to defer the meeting. If the government really does have sincerity, they could still reopen the meeting tomorrow, but we could not see any chance and opportunity and intention from the government. We could only say the government intentionally terminate the possibility of having a meeting. And the accusation of not accepting students' claim, we would say it is simply an excuse.
Moving on now, reports from Kobani in Syria say Islamic State militants have been pushed back towards the edge of the town as a result of the sustained US airstrikes and advances by the town's defenders. Till yesterday, the tussle for control of the town had been swinging the way of the Islamic State militants. Here's a report.
This is daily life in Kobani. Explosion after explosion after explosion. And this has been going on for the last 3 weeks straight. This time, the intensity was so huge, plumes of black smoke were visible from the other side of the border in Turkey. Despite a heavy onslaught by US-led jets, IS militants have reportedly recaptured more than a third of this small but strategic town. The Turkish tanks on the frontier have simply been mute spectators, something that's not lost on the fighters here.
Askerle girsin, kara harekatı yapsın, izin versin biz girelim.
The unrest in Turkey has been the fallout of the war in Syria and Iraq. Turkey's Prime Minister says his country cannot be expected to lead a ground operation against the Islamic State on its own.
Bütün vatandaşlarımız sükunete ve devletinden ve hükümetinin gücünden emin olarak olayları yakından takip etmeye davet ediyorum. Sakın ola ki birilerinin istediği tarzda bir kargaşa veya karamsar ortama sürüklenmeyin.
NATO is yet to take up Turkey's proposals for a no-fly zone or even a safe zone inside Syria. But the NATO chief had some reassuring words for the alliance.
Well, let's take a look now at some other news updates from around the globe in our World Wrap. The U.S. state of Missouri braces for more protests after an off-duty police officer fatally shot at a black teenager, leading to angry demonstrations on the streets in St. Louis. The officer was on patrol for a private security company when he exchanged fire with an 18-year-old after a chase. The teenager was shot 17 times. Recent killing of teenager Michael Brown had sparked weeks of unrest in the area. A Pakistani UN peacekeeper was killed in the Central African Republic after a convoy was ambushed in the capital, Bangui. The UN spokesperson said at least 8 other peacekeepers were injured in the incident. The death is the first since the UN took over peacekeeping duties in CAR in September to halt the violence between Christians and Muslims. At least 10 people were killed and 11 others wounded after a suicide car bomb blast at a security checkpoint in the Iraqi city of Bakuba. The incident occurred when a suicide bomber drove his explosive-laden car into a police checkpoint at an entrance of the Shifta neighborhood. 7 police officers were among the dead. The Mexican police have arrested Mexican drug lord Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, the alleged leader of one of Mexico's most powerful crime syndicates, also known as the Viceroy. Fuentes took over the cartel from his brother Armando after his death in 1997. He is said to have waged war with the rival gang that left thousands dead. The Dow Jones Industrial Average had its biggest plunge of the year, going down 334 points just a day after the market had its best day of 2014. The decline in energy stocks and worries about the global economy sent investors fleeing out of the market. This was Dow Jones's biggest point drop since June 2013. And finally, it's legendary writer R.K. Narayan's 108th birth anniversary today. Google has made him the doodle of the day. We leave you with a tribute to the writer an entire generation grew up with. Have a great day.
मैंने जैसे कहा था वो क्यों नहीं किया तुमने? बस यूं ही अक्कल लड़ाने गए थे।
मैंने इसे गाड़ी वाले का घर दिखाया, पर वहाँ से मुझे खींचकर आगे ले गया। मेरा खून करने वाला था ये।